The night I burned my prayer journal, I didn't cry. I stood in my backyard in Denver, Colorado at 2 a.m., clutching the leather-bound book that had been my constant companion for 10 years. The air was cold for September, and I shivered in my pajamas, but I felt hot with a rage that scared me. I doused the journal in lighter fluid, the smell sharp and chemical in the dark. My hands shook as I struck the match. The flame wobbled, then caught, and I dropped it onto the pages. Fire erupted, orange and hungry, eating the words I'd poured out to God, every desperate plea, every thankful whisper, every raw confession from age 23 to 33. I watched my faith turn to smoke. I thought if I could destroy this book, I could erase the hope that had turned to ash inside me. As the last page curled into blackness, I whispered, "Are you even there?" The silence that followed was louder than the fire. I went to bed numb, convinced nothing would remain but a pile of regret. But to understand how I got here, I need to take you back to where it all began. Before I continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. It means the world to me to know who's hearing this story. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where church was as regular as breakfast. My mom, Cheryl, took me every Sunday, rain or shine. She was the kind of faithful that felt quiet and steady, like a heartbeat. When I was 9, during a summer vacation Bible school, I heard the story of Jesus calming the storm. The teacher read from Mark 4:39. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. That verse stuck with me. I wanted that calm. So I prayed a simple prayer on a sticky orange carpet, asking Jesus into my heart. For a long time, my faith felt like that. Simple and sure. I started my prayer journal when I moved to Denver at 23. I'd landed my first real job as a graphic designer and rented a tiny apartment with a view of the mountains. On the first page, I wrote, "God, thank you for this adventure. Please help me not to be lonely." I was good at praying for things like that. Straightforward needs. Over the years, the journal filled up with requests for my family, for friends, for wisdom at work. When I met Brian at a coffee shop when I was 26, I wrote for pages about his smile, his kindness, how he listened to me. We married 2 years later, and my prayers became full of gratitude. "Thank you for Brian," I wrote again and again. "Thank you for this love." For a while, life felt like a smooth, paved road. Brian and I bought a house in a suburb of Denver. He worked as a high school teacher, and I moved up at my design firm. We served at church together, leading a small group for young married couples. From the outside, we were the couple who had it together, faithful, stable, happy. And mostly we were. But slowly, almost without noticing, my prayers started to change. They became more about maintenance, like I was checking in with God to keep the blessings flowing. I wrote less about seeking God and more about asking for things, a better salary, a vacation, for Brian to get a promotion. The journal felt like a log of favors, and I expected God to deliver. Then, 3 years ago, when I was 30, my mom got sick. Cancer, the kind that moves fast. My prayers became frantic, scribbled in panic. "Please, God, heal her. You can do this, I believe." I quoted verses like James 5:15 about the prayer of faith healing the sick. I begged, I bargained, I cried on the pages. When she died 6 months later, my writing turned dark. "Why didn't you listen?" I wrote. "I thought you were good." Brian tried to comfort me, but I pushed him away. I stopped praying out loud, but I kept writing in the journal, now filled with anger, confusion, and grief. The calm I'd known as a child felt like a lie. After Mom's death, Brian and I drifted. He grieved too, but he threw himself into work and church activities while I sat alone in the silence. We started arguing over small things. Money, chores, why I wouldn't go to church with him anymore. One night, he said, "Martha, I feel like I'm living with a stranger. Where's the woman I married?" I didn't have an answer. My prayer journal became a record of my doubt. I wrote questions like, "Do you even care about us?" But I kept up appearances. At church, when I went, I smiled and said I was trusting God's plan. Inside, I was crumbling. The real crack came 8 months ago. Brian started coming home late from school, saying he had meetings or was helping students. I wanted to believe him, but a cold fear settled in my stomach. One Tuesday, I was cleaning out his car, a thing I never did, and found a receipt for a fancy restaurant downtown for 2. On a night he told me he was at a teacher's conference. My heart hammered. I confronted him that evening, and he looked tired, not guilty. It was a work dinner with a colleague, Martha, just work. But his voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. I wanted to trust him, but the doubt from my mom's death had spread like a weed. choking my faith in everything, even my husband. I started watching him, noting every text notification, every time he stepped out to take a call. My prayer journal filled with paranoid pleas. God, protect my marriage. Don't let him leave me too. But the prayers felt empty, like shouting into a void. I didn't feel any peace. Instead, I felt a growing certainty that I was alone, that God had left me just like my mom had, and maybe Brian would too. Then last week, I saw her. Brian was at school, and I'd gone to the mall to distract myself. I saw him walking with a woman, both laughing, carrying coffee cups. She was pretty, young. Maybe one of the new teachers he'd mentioned. They weren't touching, but the ease between them felt intimate. I ducked behind a pillar, my face hot. That night, I didn't say anything. I just wrote in my journal, I can't do this anymore. If you're real, show me. Otherwise, I'm done. 2 days later, Brian sat me down at the kitchen table. His eyes were red. Martha, we need to talk. And he told me he'd been emotionally attached to a colleague, a woman named Ashley. He said it wasn't physical, but he'd shared things with her. He should have shared with me. His grief about my mom, his feelings of failure at work. I'm sorry, he kept saying. It's over with her. I ended it, but I need you to know I've been unfaithful in my heart. He cried, and I sat there frozen. The betrayal wasn't a full-blown affair, but it cut deeper because it confirmed my worst fear. I wasn't enough. Not for God, not for him. That was yesterday. After Brian left for work this morning, I took my prayer journal off the shelf. I read random pages, full of hope, then pain, then desperation. And I snapped. All those prayers, and for what? A dead mother, a distant husband, a silent God. The anger boiled over. That's how I ended up in the backyard tonight, burning it all. But as I lay in bed after the fire, staring at the ceiling, I remembered one last thing. Tucked under my pillow was a single page I'd torn out months ago. A prayer for my mom, with a dried flower from her garden. I hadn't burned it. I held it in the dark, and for the first time in years, I didn't pray. I just whispered, I'm so tired. And I fell asleep, not knowing that in the morning, I'd walk outside to clear the ash and find something impossible waiting for me. I woke up to the smell of smoke. It was in my hair, on my skin, a stale reminder of what I'd done. Gray light filtered through the blinds. It was Saturday. Brian was already up. I could hear the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen. For a few long moments, I just lay there, the weight of the previous night pressing down on me. There was no magical feeling, no sudden peace, just a hollow emptiness where my anger had burned itself out. I felt ashamed. Not holy conviction, just plain shame, like I'd thrown a tantrum and now had to clean up the mess. I pulled on my robe and avoided the mirror. The single page from my mom was still crumpled in my hand. I smoothed it out on the bedside table, the dried flower crumbling at the edges. I didn't know what to do with it now. Walking into the kitchen, I saw Brian at the sink, his back to me. The tension in the room was a living thing. He turned and his eyes were cautious, tired. Morning, he said, his voice quiet. I made coffee. He gestured to the pot. It was a small offering, a white flag. I just nodded, pouring a cup. The silence between us was thick and uncomfortable. I smelled smoke last night, he finally said, not looking at me. Late. Were you burning something? I took a sip of the hot, bitter coffee. Yes. What? My prayer journal. He turned fully then, his face a mix of confusion and concern. Martha? Why? I shrugged, a defensive, brittle movement. It wasn't doing any good. It was just paper. I couldn't explain the rage, the finality of it. Saying it out loud made it sound crazy. He was quiet for a minute. I'm sorry, he said. And it wasn't about the journal. It was about everything. Ashley, my mom, the distance. I knew that. But the words bounced off the numbness inside me. I need to clean up the ashes, I said, just to have something to do, to escape the kitchen. I set my cup down and walked to the sliding glass door. The backyard looked different in the flat morning light. The grass was tipped with frost, and the sky was the color of old chalk. My gaze went straight to the fire pit, a simple metal ring we used for s'mores in the summer. I expected to see a pile of blackened debris, maybe the twisted metal spiral of the notebook's binding. I saw nothing. I blinked, thinking the angle was wrong. I stepped out onto the cold patio stones, the chill biting through my slippers. I walked right up to the edge of the fire pit. It was empty, not a speck of ash, not a single charred fragment of paper. The lighter fluid can was on its side nearby, the matchbook beside it, but the pit itself was clean, as if it had been scrubbed. My heart did a funny, lurching thing. This made no sense. I'd stood here and watched it burn. I'd seen the pages curl and blacken. I'd gone to bed with the acrid scent in my nostrils. I knelt down, touching the cold metal interior. Spotless. "Did you clean this?" I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. Brian appeared at the door. "Clean what?" "The fire pit. It's empty." He came out, pulling his sweatshirt tighter around him. He looked at the pit, then at me, his brow furrowed. "No, I didn't touch it. Maybe the wind." But there had been no wind. The night had been perfectly still. And wind doesn't remove every single ash without a trace. A cold trickle, different from the morning air, went down my spine. This was wrong. Then I saw it. Sitting on the wooden bench by the fence, the one where I sometimes drank my morning tea in the summer, was a book. It was positioned neatly, squarely, as if placed there with care. The deep burgundy leather cover caught a thin beam of sunlight breaking through the clouds. I couldn't breathe. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I walked toward the bench, each step slow and deliberate. Brian followed, a question dying on his lips as he saw it too. It was my prayer journal. Not a new one. Mine. The one I'd bought a decade ago at a little bookstore in Denver with a small scrape on the corner from when I'd dropped it in a parking lot. The one I'd doused in fluid and set on fire hours before. I stopped a foot away, staring. It looked whole, untouched. No scorch marks, no smell of smoke. Just my old familiar journal. "That's not possible," Brian whispered, his voice full of awe and fear. A wild, irrational thought shot through me. Had I dreamed it? Had the whole burning been some intense emotional dream? But I could still smell the smoke in my hair. I remembered the weight of the match in my hand, the roar of the flame. Trembling, I reached out and picked it up. It felt solid, real. The leather was cool. I held it against my chest for a second, my mind racing in frantic, terrified circles. Then with a shaky finger, I opened the cover. My handwriting stared back at me. The first hopeful entry from 23-year-old me. "God, thank you for this adventure." I flipped through, pages rustling. All of it was there. The joyful entries about Brian, the desperate prayers for my mom, the angry scribbled questions after she died, the paranoid pleas about my marriage, every single word preserved. But when I got to the very end, to the last page I'd written on just 2 days ago, I saw something new. After my final furious sentence, "I'm done." The page was not full. There was blank space. And there, in the center of the next empty page, was a single line of writing. It was in my handwriting, but I had not written it. The ink was the same blue pen I used, but the words made my knees go weak. It read, "I have loved you with an everlasting love." I knew that verse. It was from the Bible, Jeremiah something. My mom had it on a plaque in her kitchen. A sob caught in my throat, sharp and sudden. This wasn't a parlor trick. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had heard me. Someone had answered my furious, faithless act, not with punishment, but with a quiet, impossible statement of fact. I sank down onto the bench, the journal heavy in my lap. Brian sat slowly beside me, not touching me, just present. He was looking at the journal, then at my face. "What is it, Martha?" he asked, his voice hushed. "What does it mean?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed to the words. He leaned over and read them. I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. For a long time, we sat there in the cold silence, surrounded by the ordinary details of our backyard. The faded lawn chairs, the kids' soccer ball by the fence, the mountain peaks in the distance, and between us, this impossible thing. The hollowness inside me was gone. It wasn't filled with easy joy or instant solutions. It was filled with a profound, shaking awe and a terrifying question. What do you do when the God you thought was silent reaches into your world and does something you cannot explain? I looked at Brian, really looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, but also a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who believed in things bigger than himself. The betrayal still hurt, a raw, open wound. My grief for my mom was still a stone in my heart. Nothing was fixed, but everything was different, because the journal in my hands was real. The words were real. And if that was true, then maybe the love written on that last page was real too. Not a feeling, but a fact, everlasting, even when I tried to burn it away. I closed the book gently. The practical part of my mind was screaming questions. The doubting part was scrambling for a logical explanation, but a deeper, quieter part of me, the part that had prayed on orange carpet as a child, just knew. "I don't know what happens now," I said to Brian, my voice rough. "With us. With any of it." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know." But as I clutched the restored journal, a new and frightening tension took root. This was a miracle, a private, quiet one. And miracles demand a response. They don't let you go back to the way things were. I had my journal back, but my marriage was still broken, my heart was still shattered, and I had just been given a sign I couldn't ignore. The real question wasn't about the past anymore, it was about the future. What was I supposed to do next? And as the morning sun finally broke fully through the clouds, washing the yard in light, I realized the easy part was finding the journal whole. The hard part was going to be learning to believe the words written inside it. We sat on that cold bench for what felt like an hour, just staring at the journal in my hands. The words everlasting love seemed to pulse on the page, a quiet accusation against all my bitterness. Finally, Brian cleared his throat. "We should go inside. You're freezing." I realized I was shivering, a deep bone tremble that was part cold and part shock. Inside, the normalcy of our kitchen felt like a dream. The coffee pot, the cereal box on the counter, a fly buzzing against the window. I placed the journal on the table between us like a third person, one who knew all our secrets. "What are you thinking?" Brian asked. He looked terrified of my answer. I traced the scrape on the journal's corner. "I'm thinking that last night I was so sure God wasn't listening, that he'd closed some cosmic door, and now... this!" My voice cracked. "It doesn't fix anything, Brian. It doesn't undo what you did. It doesn't bring my mom back." "I know," he said quickly, his shoulders slumping. "I'm not asking it to. I wouldn't dare." We fell into another silence. The miracle felt too big, too holy for our messy kitchen and our broken marriage. It was easier to talk about logistics. "Did you tell anyone?" I asked. "About Ashley?" He shook his head. "No, I was too ashamed. I just ended it with her on Thursday. I told her it was wrong, that I was hurting you, that it had to stop." He ran a hand over his face. She was upset. "She said I'd led her on. I guess I had. I wasn't thinking about her either. I was just selfish and lonely." Hearing him say it, the raw, ugly truth of it, hurt in a new way. It wasn't a grand passion. It was a small, stupid, selfish series of choices. In a weird way, that made it harder to hate. Monsters are easier to fight than flawed, weak people. "I need time," I said, the most honest thing I'd said in months. "I don't know what this," I pointed to the journal, "means for us. I just know I can't pretend anymore." "I don't want you to pretend," he whispered. "I'll give you whatever you need. Space, time. I'll sleep in the guest room." He did that night. The house felt cavernous, the silence between our two closed doors louder than any argument. I took the journal to my bed and opened it to that last page again. Everlasting love. I got out my phone and looked up the verse, Jeremiah 31:3. I read it. "I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with unfailing kindness." Unfailing kindness? The words felt like a balm and a rebuke. Where had I seen unfailing kindness lately? I'd been so buried in my own pain, I hadn't looked for it. I thought of my friend, Chloe, from church. She'd texted me every single week since Mom died. Just a simple, thinking of you, or a funny meme. I'd stopped replying months ago, but she never stopped sending them. That was a kind of faithfulness. I thought of Brian, making coffee this morning, his eyes full of remorse. It wasn't enough, not nearly, but it was a start. The next day was Sunday. Brian didn't ask if I was going to church, he just got ready quietly. As he was heading for the door, I heard myself say, "I'm not ready to go, but you should." He looked back, surprise and hope flickering in his eyes. "Okay, I'll tell people you're not feeling well." "Tell them the truth," I said, the words surprising me. "If anyone asks, tell them we're going through a hard time and need prayer." I was tired of the facade. The journal had burned away my ability to pretend. He nodded, a deep sadness in his expression. "I will." After he left, the house was mine. I made tea and took the journal into the living room. I started reading it from the beginning, not just skimming, but really reading the story of the last 10 years. It was painful. I saw the slow shift from gratitude to entitlement. I saw how after Mom died, my prayers became demands, then accusations. I'd stopped listening. I'd just talked, yelled, cried. I treated God like a negligent service provider. Around page 60, I found a prayer from 4 years ago before Mom got sick. I'd written, "God, Brian is feeling really insecure at work. The new principal is riding him hard. Help me to be an encouragement to him, to really listen and not just try to fix it. I'd forgotten that. Lately, when he talked about work, I'd just tuned out, wrapped in my own grief. A knot of conviction tightened in my stomach. This wasn't about taking blame for his choices. He'd made his own, terrible decisions. But the journal was showing me my own walls, my own failures in the in sickness and in health department. I'd left him alone in his struggles too. We'd abandoned each other. I was crying when I heard Brian's car return. I quickly closed the journal and wiped my face. He came in, looking drained. He set a brown paper bag on the counter. I brought you a muffin from the coffee hour. Banana nut. It was such a small, stupid gesture, but it was the kind I used to love. He remembered. Thanks, I said, my voice thick. He leaned against the counter, not coming closer. I told Pastor Mark we were in crisis, that I'd been unfaithful and we were separated in the house. He prayed with me. He said to take it one day at a time and that they're here for us both. My face flushed hot. Everyone knew now. The thought was humiliating, but also a strange relief. The secret was out. The perfect couple image was officially ashes. How did it feel, I asked. Telling him? Terrifying, Jim Brian said. And like the first true thing I've done in a year. We existed in that tense, fragile space for a week. We were polite, like careful roommates. We texted about groceries. We avoided the living room at the same time. The journal stayed on my nightstand. I read more of it, each entry a mirror, showing me a version of myself I'd forgotten or ignored. Then, on Friday evening, the doorbell rang. Brian answered it. I was in the kitchen, and I heard a woman's voice, shaky and unfamiliar. Is Martha here? I need to talk to her. My blood ran cold. I knew who it was before I walked into the foyer. Ashley? She was younger than I'd remembered from the mall, and she looked awful, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She clutched her purse like a shield. Brian looked stricken, frozen in the doorway. Ashley, you shouldn't be here, he said, his voice low and strained. I know, she said, her eyes darting past him to me. They filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for coming to your house. I need to say something to your wife, to Martha. Please. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door, to yell, to unleash the fury I'd burned into that journal. This woman represented the deepest betrayal of my life. But standing there, seeing her raw, miserable face, she didn't look like a villain. She looked like a lost, hurting kid. And behind that thought came another, quiet as the writing in my journal. Unfailing kindness. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the test. The miracle of the journal wasn't a magic wand. It was an invitation into something harder. I looked at Brian's panicked face, then at Ashley's pleading one. Come in, I said, my voice strangely calm. We'll talk in the living room. The shock on Brian's face was absolute. Ashley looked like she might faint. I turned and walked toward the living room, not knowing what I would say, not knowing if this was wisdom or foolishness, only knowing that the old Martha would have thrown her out and the woman who found a restored journal couldn't do that anymore. As Ashley stepped nervously over the threshold, I caught sight of the journal, still sitting on the coffee table where I'd left it. It was a silent witness to what was about to unfold. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that whatever happened in the next few minutes would change everything all over again. The three of us in the living room felt like a terrible, silent play where no one knew their lines. Ashley perched on the very edge of the armchair, back rigid. Brian stood by the fireplace, looking like he wanted to vanish into the bricks. I sat on the couch, the journal an undeniable presence on the coffee table between us. I didn't pick it up. It just sat there, a quiet judge. I'll go, Brian said, his voice strained. This is between you two. No, Ashley and I said at the same time, then flinched at the unison. She looked at me, her eyes wide and wet. He should stay, I said, my hands clenched in my lap. This involves him. It involves all of us. This wasn't some private catfight. This was the messy, tangled consequence of his choices, and he needed to feel the weight of it. Ashley nodded, swallowing hard. She looked down at her hands, twisting a silver ring around and around her finger. I don't have an excuse, she began, her voice so quiet we had to lean forward to hear. I knew he was married. I'd seen his wedding ring. In the beginning, it was just work friends. We were both new teachers, both feeling overwhelmed. He was kind. He listened to me. I felt Brian tense by the fireplace. I kept my eyes on Ashley. Let her talk. Then he started talking about how hard things were at home, she continued, a tear slipping down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. About your mom passing and how you were gone. He said he felt lonely. I felt lonely too. My boyfriend had just moved away. It felt like we were two people clinging to a life raft. She looked up at me then, her gaze desperate. It was wrong. I know that now with every part of me, but in the moment, it didn't feel like cheating. It felt like survival. We never kissed, never even held hands, but we shared things. We texted late. We had coffee almost every day. It was emotional, and that's worse, in a way. Because I can't even point to a moment and say that's where we crossed the line. The line just disappeared. Her honesty was disarming. She wasn't painting herself as a victim or a seductress. She was painting a picture of slow, quiet compromise. I knew that picture. I'd been drawing one with my own anger and distance. When he ended it last week, Ashley said, he said he was choosing his wife. He said he'd remembered his vows. I was hurt and angry. I felt used, but then I couldn't sleep. I've been to church my whole life, Martha. I knew what we did was a sin, and I realized I wasn't just the other woman in some drama. I was a person who helped break a covenant. I became someone I don't recognize. She took a shuddering breath. I resigned from the school today. I'm moving back to Iowa to live with my parents for a while. I came here because I couldn't leave without looking you in the face and saying I am so profoundly sorry for the pain I helped cause, for invading your marriage, for everything. The room was utterly still. Her apology hung in the air, raw and complete. It didn't magically heal the wound, but it did something important. It acknowledged the wound existed. She wasn't minimizing it. I looked at Brian. His face was pale, etched with shame. Is that true? I asked him. About choosing me? He nodded, his own eyes glistening. It is. When I ended it with Ashley, it wasn't because I got caught. It was because I woke up and saw what I was becoming. I was becoming a man who breaks promises. I looked at our wedding picture and I hated myself. He looked at Ashley. And I'm sorry too, Ashley. I used your loneliness. I was your superior. It was my responsibility to keep boundaries, and I didn't. I led you into this. The damage to your job, your faith, that's on me. They were apologizing to each other now, in front of me. It was surreal and painfully intimate. I was the wronged wife, but in that moment, I felt like a witness to two people realizing the cost of their sin. The kindness I'd read about in Jeremiah felt like a directive here, but it was so hard. My hurt wanted to lash out, to make them both feel a fraction of my pain. But the journal on the table seemed to whisper, everlasting, unfailing. I took a deep, ragged breath. Ashley, I said. Her name felt foreign in my mouth. Thank you for coming. Thank you for apologizing. The words tasted like ash, but I meant them. I can't say I forgive you right now. That's not a switch I can flip. The trust is gone. But I accept your apology, and I believe you're sorry. It wasn't grace, not fully. It was a brutal, truthful acknowledgement. It was all I had. She broke down then, crying in earnest, her shoulders shaking. Thank you, she choked out. I don't deserve that. No, I said softly, you don't, and Brian doesn't, and I don't deserve a journal given back to me whole when I tried to destroy it. I finally reached out and touched the leather cover. But here we all are. Ashley left a few minutes later, after refusing a glass of water, looking both shattered and lighter. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The silence in the living room was now a different kind of heavy. Brian sank into the chair Ashley had vacated, his head in his hands. I don't know what to say. There's nothing left to say right now, I said. Exhaustion washing over me. The encounter had drained my last reserves. She did what she needed to do. Now we have to do what we need to do. That night, the distance between our bedrooms felt infinite. I lay awake, the conversation replaying. I'd faced the other woman and hadn't screamed. I'd spoken with a calm I didn't know I possessed. Where had that come from? Was that the beginning of forgiveness? Or just emotional shock? A week passed. The first frost settled on Denver for good. Brian and I started marriage counseling at Pastor Mark's recommendation. The first session was agony, stilted sentences, long pauses, tears of frustration. But we went. We showed up. I kept reading the journal. I started writing in it again. My first new entry was shaky. God, I don't know how to do this. The feeling is gone. Help me to choose what's true when I don't feel it. It felt pathetic compared to my old, confident prayers, but it was honest. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, I got the call. It was my dad back in Ohio. His voice was tight, trying to be calm. "Honey, it's your Aunt Karen. She had a massive heart attack. She's in the ICU. It doesn't look good." Aunt Karen was my mom's sister, my last living link to her, the one who told stories about mom as a girl, who had her smile, who sent me birthday cards with $10 bills tucked inside even though I was 33. I hung up the phone, my world tilting again. Grief, fresh and familiar, rose up like a wave. Not again. I can't do this again. Brian came home an hour later to find me sitting in the dark living room, suitcase at my feet. "I have to go to Ohio," I said, my voice flat. "Tonight." He didn't hesitate. "I'll book you a flight. Do you want me to come?" The question hung between us. Did I? In a crisis, you want your partner. But was he still my partner? The man who had shared his heart with another woman? Yet he was also the man who had brought me a muffin, who was going to counseling, who looked at me now with nothing but concern. "I don't know," I whispered, the truth tumbling out. "I'm scared to go alone, but I'm scared to have you there too." He knelt in front of me, careful not to touch me. "I will get on a plane if you say the word, or I will stay here and hold down the fort. You decide. I'm with you either way." I looked into his eyes, seeing the earnest, flawed man I'd married. The betrayal was a canyon between us, but in that moment his offer felt like a rope bridge thrown across the chasm. It was shaky and untrustworthy, but it was there. "Book 2 tickets, I said, my heart pounding. "But Brian, this doesn't fix us. This is just for now." "I know," he said. And for the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of the old, steady Brian. "I'll just be there, however you need me." As he hurried to his laptop, I packed in a daze. I tucked the prayer journal into my carry-on bag. On the way to the airport, watching the city lights blur past, the tension was a live wire. We were flying into a family tragedy, a whirlwind of old grief and new fear, and we were doing it as strangers and husband and wife, bound by a broken covenant and a miracle we couldn't explain. The real test wasn't going to be in the therapist's office. It was going to be in a sterile hospital hallway in Ohio, where pain would strip us bare and I would have to decide what to do with this man by my side. The plane ride was a 4-hour bubble of unnatural quiet. We didn't talk. Brian offered me the window seat, and I took it, staring out at the endless blackness, dotted with the occasional cluster of town lights like fallen stars. He read a book on his phone. I could see the reflection of the text on his glasses, but his eyes weren't moving. He was pretending, just like I was pretending to sleep. I held my carry-on bag on my lap, my fingers touching the hard edge of the journal inside. Everlasting love. The words felt theoretical, at 30,000 feet, dwarfed by the practical dread of what waited on the ground. What if Aunt Karen died? She was the last one who called me Marty, my childhood nickname. The last one who remembered my mom in the same vivid, daily way I did. Losing her would be like losing my mom all over again, and the thought made it hard to breathe. We landed in Cleveland just after midnight. The airport was deserted, all echoing footsteps and harsh fluorescent lights. Brian handled the rental car, his movements efficient and tired. I let him. In the sterile garage, he loaded our bags into a compact SUV. "Your dad said the hospital is about 40 minutes away. Visiting hours are over, but he said we can go to the waiting room on her floor." I just nodded, sliding into the passenger seat. The Ohio air that seeped in when he opened the door smelled different than Denver. Damp, earthy, familiar. It smelled like my childhood, like grief. He drove while I navigated on my phone. The silence continued, but it had changed. It was no longer the hostile silence of our house. It was the focused silence of a shared mission. We were 2 soldiers heading toward a battlefield, our personal war temporarily shelved. The hospital was a monument of shadows and beeping lights. The ICU waiting room was a sad place at 2 a.m. Worn couches, a blaring television on mute, a coffee pot with an inch of black sludge at the bottom. My dad was there, a small, shrunken version of himself in a windbreaker. He stood up when he saw me, and we hugged tightly. Over his shoulder, I saw him spot Brian. His body stiffened slightly. I'd called him from the airport and told him the bare minimum. "We're having problems. He's here to support me, but it's complicated." Dad gave Brian a stiff nod, which Brian returned. "She's stable for now," Dad said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "They put in a stent. The next 24 hours are critical. She's sedated. You can't see her until morning. He looked at me, his eyes watery. "She asked for you before they put her under, said, 'Tell Marty to pray.'" The words were a physical blow. Aunt Karen, hooked up to machines, thinking of me, asking for prayers from the niece who had burned her own prayers in a fit of rage. Guilt, hot and sour, rose in my throat. "I'll go get some coffee from downstairs," Brian said softly, perceptively giving me and my dad space. He touched my elbow lightly, a question. I gave a slight nod, and he disappeared down the hall. Dad and I sat down. He told me the details, the sudden chest pain, the ambulance, the frantic surgery. I listened, but my mind was churning. When he paused, I reached into my bag and pulled out the journal. I just held it. "What's that?" Dad asked. "My prayer journal," I said. "From Denver. Looks old." "It is." I opened it, not to any specific page, just letting it fall open. It landed in the middle, from a few years back. A prayer about work stress. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Dad, do you ever feel like God just goes quiet?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at the muted news anchor on the screen. "After your mom died," he said slowly, "I didn't feel anything for a year. Not anger, not sadness, not God. Just numb. I kept going to church because she would have wanted me to. I felt like a hypocrite. Then one day I was raking leaves and a cardinal landed on the fence. Your mom loved cardinals, and I didn't hear a voice or get a sign. I just felt a memory of love. Not even the love itself, just the memory of it. And it was enough to take the next breath." He looked at me. Maybe sometimes the answer isn't a feeling. Maybe it's just the strength to take the next breath. The next breath? I thought of the journal, whole after the fire. A breath I didn't deserve. Brian came back with 3 coffees in a cardboard carrier. He handed one to Dad, one to me. "Cream and 2 sugars, right, Martha?" he said. He remembered. In the chaos, he remembered how I took my coffee. It was such a small, married thing. I took the cup, our fingers brushing. "Thanks." We sat in that awful waiting room for the rest of the night. Dad dozed off in his chair. Brian sat beside me, not touching, just present. As the sky began to lighten from black to deep blue, I opened the journal to a fresh page. I didn't know what to write. My mind was a static of fear and exhaustion. Slowly, I just began to write the facts. "Aunt Karen, I see you. Dad is tired. Brian is here. I am scared." Then, almost against my will, I added, "Thank you for the coffee. Thank you for Dad's words. Help me to take the next breath." It wasn't a glorious prayer. It was a scrap. But it was true. At 7 a.m., a nurse said we could see her, 2 at a time. Dad and I went first. Aunt Karen looked tiny and ancient in the bed, a web of tubes and wires connecting her to beeping monitors. Her skin was pale gray, but when I took her hand, her fingers curled around mine with a weak pressure. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy from sedation. "Marty," she breathed, a whisper of sound. "I'm here, Aunt Karen." "You prayed?" she murmured, her eyes struggling to focus on me. My throat closed. I couldn't lie to this woman. Not here. "I'm trying," I whispered back. Tears finally spilling over. "It's hard right now." A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "He knows. It's hard." She squeezed my hand. "Tell that handsome husband to be good to you." A sob escaped me. I just nodded, unable to speak. We stayed a few more minutes until she drifted back to sleep. Back in the waiting room, I was raw. "Your turn," I said to Brian, my voice wrecked. "She asked for you." He looked startled, then solemn. He followed a nurse back. Dad went to get breakfast from the cafeteria. I was alone. The emotional dam broke. I cried for Aunt Karen, for my mom, for my broken marriage, for the terrifying, beautiful mystery of the journal on my lap. I cried until my head throbbed. When Brian returned, his eyes were red-rimmed. He didn't say anything about his visit. He just sat next to me. And after a moment, he tentatively put his arm around my shoulders. I was too spent to resist. I leaned into him, my head against his chest, and he held me while I cried. It wasn't reconciliation. It was human comfort, a moment of shared sorrow in a cold waiting room. But for the first time in a year, his touch didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a memory of what we used to be. Later that afternoon, the doctor gave a more hopeful update. Aunt Karen was responding well. She was out of immediate danger. The relief was a physical wave, leaving me trembling. We checked into a nearby motel, 2 double beds. The space between them felt like a chasm again, but a less hostile one. We were both shell-shocked and grateful. We ordered pizza and ate it in silence, watching the local news. As I got ready for bed, brushing my teeth in the small bathroom, I looked at my reflection, pale, puffy-eyed, a woman in the middle of a storm. I thought of my prayer from the night before. The next breath, I had taken it, and then another. And Brian had been there, quietly handing me coffee, holding me when I fell apart, visiting my aunt because she asked. He was already in his bed, reading on his phone when I came out. I stood between the two beds, the journal in my hand. "Brian," I said. He looked up, taking off his glasses. "What you did with Ashley, it broke me." He nodded, his face solemn. "I know. But today, you were what I needed. Not out of guilt. You were just there. Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness, it was recognition. A tiny, fragile step on the rope bridge. He swallowed hard. "There's nowhere else I'd want to be, Martha." I got into my own bed and turned out the light. The room was dark, the only sound the hum of the motel air conditioner. The journal lay on the nightstand between us. The cliffhanger wasn't a dramatic one. It was the quiet, terrifying question that formed in my heart in the dark. What if the miracle wasn't just the journal? What if the miracle is also the slow, painful daily choice to not walk away? And as I lay there, listening to the rhythm of his breathing in the next bed, I realized the much harder fire to walk through was still ahead. The fire of rebuilding trust, day by day, breath by breath, with no guarantee it would ever be whole again. We returned to Denver on a Tuesday. The Colorado sky was a bold, indifferent blue, the mountains standing firm as if the world hadn't shifted in our absence. The house felt different. It wasn't the sanctuary I'd left. It was a crime scene and a construction site all at once. The memory of Ashley's visit lingered in the living room. The ghost of my burned journal was gone from the backyard, but its tangible, restored twin was now in my suitcase, a weight I carried with me everywhere. The first few days were a delicate dance of avoidance and necessity. Brian went back to work. I called my design firm and extended my leave of absence. I wasn't ready to face the bright, demanding world of clients and deadlines. My emotional resources were down to a thimbleful. Aunt Karen was recovering slowly but surely. Dad called every evening with updates. Each call ended with, "And how are you two doing?" I'd say, "We're managing," which was the truth. We were managing logistics, laundry, grocery shopping, who showered first in the morning. The grand, terrifying work of forgiveness was too big to look at directly, so we tinkered around the edges. The journal became my nightly ritual. I'd write a few lines, sometimes just a single sentence. Today I made soup. It felt normal. Or Brian took out the trash without me asking. I noticed. I was chronicling the rubble and the small acts of clearing it. That Sunday, we faced a new hurdle. Church. Brian had been going alone while I was away. Now, we were both here, on a Sunday morning, staring at our closet like it was a battlefield. "We don't have to go," Brian said, holding a dress shirt. "We do," I replied, pulling a simple sweater dress from its hanger. "If we're going to do this, we can't hide forever. Pastor Mark knows. Who knows who else he's told?" The thought of walking into that familiar lobby, under the gaze of people who thought they knew us, made my stomach clench. "Okay," he said, a simple acceptance. "Side by side?" The phrase was from our counseling session. Side by side, not heart to heart. Yet. It meant we presented a united front to the outside world, not pretending everything was perfect, but not airing our dirty laundry either. We were allies, if not yet partners. Walking into the church building was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. The greeter, an elderly man named Frank, beamed at us. "The Morgans, so good to see you both. We've missed you." His kindness was a knife. I forced a smile. "Thank you, Frank. Good to be back." I could feel the glances, subtle and not so subtle, from people in the lobby. The couple who led the small group with us. The women from the Bible study I'd stopped attending. Their smiles were warm, but their eyes were curious, probing. They know, I thought, or they suspect. The story of the perfect couple's fracture was probably the quiet, juicy gossip of the spring. We sat in our usual row, near the back. The music started, and I stood, but the words of the worship song stuck in my throat. "Your love never fails, never gives up, never runs out on me." I stared at the screen, the promise feeling like a mockery. My love had failed. Brian's had given up and run out. How could I sing this? Then I felt a touch on my elbow. Brian had leaned in. His voice was low, just for me. "You don't have to sing," It's okay to just stand here. He wasn't performing. He saw my struggle. He gave me permission to be broken in the middle of the praise song. It was a small mercy, but it was real. I nodded, and we stood there together in silence while the music swirled around us. After the service, the test came. Chloe, my friend, who had faithfully texted, found me near the coffee station. She hugged me tight. I heard about your aunt. I'm so glad she's okay. Then she pulled back, her eyes searching mine. And I heard you guys are walking through a really hard time. I'm praying, Martha. The directness was a relief. Thank you, Chloe. That means a lot. I didn't offer details. She didn't ask for them. But then came Susan. Susan was in her 60s, sweet-faced, but with a tendency to speak spiritual platitudes over deep pain. She swooped in, taking both my hands. Martha, dear, we've been praying for you and Brian. Remember, God won't give you more than you can handle. The old cliche hit me like a slap. My mom's cancer was more than I could handle. Brian's betrayal was more than I could handle. I'd already broken under the weight. I managed a tight smile and extracted my hands. Susan barreled on, lowering her voice confidentially. And you know, dear, the enemy attacks strong marriages. You just have to bind him in Jesus' name and stand on the rock. It took every ounce of my willpower not to scream. This wasn't a demonic attack. It was a human failure. It was Brian's weakness and my own. To spiritualize it felt like an insult to the grueling, unglamorous work we were trying to do. I saw Brian a few feet away, caught in a similar conversation with another man, looking politely trapped. I escaped to the bathroom, locking myself in a stall. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal door, breathing heavily. This was why people hid their struggles in church. The well-meaning but simplistic answers, the pressure to have a testimony of quick victory. I didn't have a victory. I had a mystery, a restored journal, and a daily slog. When I came out, Brian was waiting for me by the door. You okay? He asked quietly. Susan, I said, and he winced in understanding. Yeah. Greg over there told me I needed to reclaim my authority as the spiritual head of the household. He shook his head, a tired, sad movement. I don't feel like the head of anything. I feel like I'm trying to learn how to be a foundation again, and right now it's just sand. His honesty, right here in the church hallway, was a gift. It was our truth against the cliches. We drove home in a heavier silence. The side-by-side front had held, but it was exhausting. The real world, with all its painful complexity, didn't fit into the neat boxes offered to us that morning. That afternoon, I found Brian in the backyard, staring at the empty fire pit. I joined him, the spring sun warm on our shoulders. I keep thinking about it, he said, not looking at me. That night. What it must have taken for you to do that, to be that hopeless. I said simply. I caused that. His voice broke. I didn't just break a rule, Martha. I broke your faith. I think that's what I hate myself for the most. His words hung in the air, the truest confession he'd offered yet. It wasn't just I sinned. It was I shattered your world. I didn't have comfort to offer, but I had a fact. The journal came back, I said. Why? He asked, finally turning to me, his eyes desperate. Why would God do that? After I did what I did? After you rejected it all? I looked at the clean, empty pit where my faith had turned to ash and was now, inexplicably, a bound book on my nightstand. I don't know, I whispered. Maybe to show me his love isn't like ours. Maybe to show me that what we break, he can restore. I paused, the next word sticking. But it's his to restore, Brian, not mine. I can't glue us back together because I feel pressure from church or because I'm scared to be alone. It has to be real, and I don't know if it can be. It was the hardest thing I'd said to him, that despite the miracle, despite his remorse, I might never be able to love him the same way again. The hope of full restoration might be another thing I had to grieve. He nodded, absorbing the blow. I know, he said, his shoulders slumping. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for the chance to be a man who deserves to sit in the same backyard with you. A week later, the test came from an unexpected direction. It was a Wednesday, and Brian had a parent-teacher conference evening. He'd told me it would run late. I was at home, trying to sketch for work, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Hey Brian, it's Jessica from school. I left my folder in your classroom after the conference. Any chance you're still there and could let me in? I'm in the parking lot. My blood turned to ice. Jessica, a new name. The old paranoid script started playing instantly in my mind. He's working late, a woman is texting him, she's in the parking lot. The sick feeling from the months before came roaring back. I stared at the phone. I could call him, accuse him. I could drive to the school, a crazy wife checking up, or I could do something different. My hands were shaking as I picked up my own phone. I didn't call Brian. I texted the number back. This is Martha, Brian's wife. He's likely on his way home. I'll let him know you texted. If it's urgent, you could try the school's night custodian. I hit send, my heart pounding. I was inserting myself into his professional space. I was claiming my place as his wife, not in a possessive way, but in a factual one, and I was choosing with trembling hands a sliver of trust. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Brian. Hey, he said, the sound of car tires in the background. I just got a weird text from Jessica. It said you'd replied. She texted your phone asking for the folder, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I answered it. There was a pause. Oh, another pause. I could hear him thinking. Thank you, he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. For telling me, and for how you answered. That was really smart. He wasn't defensive. He was grateful. I'm 10 minutes from home. I'll show you the text thread when I get there. She's a first-year teacher, a bit scattered. When he walked in, he handed me his phone without a word. I read the thread. It was exactly as he'd said. His last reply to her, sent after my text, read, My wife let me know you messaged. I've left for the day. Sorry I can't help. Try the main office tomorrow. He had backed me up. He had reinforced the boundary, publicly and kindly. That night I wrote in the journal. A test came. I didn't run. He didn't hide. It felt like a single, solid brick where there had been only sand. But as I closed the journal, a new fear, cold and clear, settled in. We were building something new, brick by painful brick. But what if, after all this work, we built a sturdy, beautiful house, and found we no longer wanted to live in it together? What if the love that returned was a different, quieter love, one that couldn't sustain a marriage? The cliffhanger wasn't about another crisis or betrayal. It was the terrifying possibility that the most faithful outcome might not be a restored marriage, but a peaceful, heartbreaking end. And I had no idea how to tell which path the miracle was leading us down. The brick held. The next morning, over coffee, things felt different. Not fixed, but stable in a new way. We didn't talk about the text from Jessica. We didn't need to. It was a solved problem, a demon faced and dismissed together. It gave us a blueprint. For the next month, we followed it, counseling every Tuesday, side by side at church on Sunday, learning to tune out the Susans and cherish the Chloes. We started eating dinner at the table again, instead of in front of separate TVs. The conversations were safe, work, dad, Aunt Karen's rehab, the neighbor's loud dog. We were building a new language, one without the old, easy intimacy, but with a careful respect. The journal filled. My entries were no longer just chronicles of pain or lists of grievances. They became questions. What does forgiveness look like when the wound keeps aching? Is staying an act of faith or just fear? I didn't write to a distant God anymore. I wrote to the one who had pulled my words from the fire. It felt more like a conversation, even when the answers were just more quiet strength for the next breath. Then, on a rainy Saturday in May, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Pastor Mark and his wife, Lisa. They stood on our porch under a single umbrella, their faces kind and serious. My first instinct was panic. Had we done something wrong? Was this a disciplinary visit? But Brian welcomed them in calmly, as if he'd been expecting them. We sat in the living room, the same space that had held Ashley's tearful apology. Lisa complimented the new throw pillows, a nervous attempt at normalcy. Pastor Mark cut to the chase, his hands folded in his lap. We're not here as pastors today, he said. We're here as friends who care about you both. We've been praying for you every day since Brian first talked to me. He looked at me, then at Brian. Lisa and I, early in our marriage, went through a season of profound brokenness. Not infidelity, but a betrayal of trust that felt just as catastrophic. Lisa nodded, her eyes soft with memory. It nearly ended us, and the church, well-meaning as it was, didn't always know how to help. They wanted the pretty redemption story, and we were stuck in the ugly middle chapters. I felt something unlock in my chest. Here was someone naming the exact tension I felt every Sunday. We learned, Lisa continued, that reconciliation is a slow miracle. It's not a moment, it's 1,000 moments of choosing. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is admit how utterly unspiritual it feels. Her words were a balm. They validated our slog. We wanted to offer you two things, Pastor Mark said. First, a standing invitation to our back porch, anytime, for coffee or just silence, no sermons attached. And second, a warning. His tone grew gentle but firm. The enemy of your souls right now isn't temptation, it's despair. It's the lie that because it's hard and it hurts, it's not God's work. Or the lie that if you can't feel the old love, what you're building is worthless. Brian was listening intently, his eyes glistening. I realized how lonely his repentance must have been, carrying the label of the sinner in all this. Can I ask, I ventured, how you got through? How you knew whether to keep going? Mark and Lisa exchanged a look, a whole conversation passing between them. We didn't know, Mark said. We just took a next step. And then another. We focused on being trustworthy in the smallest things. And one day, years later, we looked up and realized the new thing we'd built was stronger than the old thing we'd lost. It was different, it had scars, but it was good. Scars, not erasure, transformation. After they left, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. Brian and I stood in the kitchen, the atmosphere charged with a new kind of vulnerability. I never asked you, I said softly. What was it like for you, walking into his office that first time? He leaned against the counter, looking out the window. It was like walking to my own execution. I was sure he'd tell me I was disqualified, that I had to step down from everything, and part of me wanted him too. I wanted to be punished. He turned to me, but he just listened. And then he cried with me, and he said, "The ground is level at the foot of the cross, Brian. Your sin is no uglier than my pride." It was the first time I felt a flicker of hope that God hadn't written me off. We were quiet for a moment, sharing the same air, the same fragile hope. "Martha," he said, his voice rough. "I know the journal is yours, it's your miracle, but would you ever consider letting me see it? Not all of it. Just the part from that night. I want to see what was written." The request shocked me. The journal was my most private possession, my proof of the divine. Letting him into that sacred space felt dangerous. But the man asking wasn't the man who had betrayed me. He was the man who was trying, brick by brick, to rebuild. Wasn't this the essence of side by side? My heart hammered. "Okay," I whispered, "but just that page." I went to my nightstand and brought it back. My hands trembled as I opened it to the very end, to the page after my last furious entry. There it was, in the center. "I have loved you with an everlasting love." I handed it to him. He took it reverently, as if handling something holy. His eyes scanned the page, taking in my angry scribble, the blank space, and then that single perfect line. He stared at it for a long time. A tear fell from his cheek and landed on the open page, right next to the word unfailing from the Jeremiah verse I'd looked up and written in the margin. He didn't wipe it away. He just looked at the watermark his grief had made on the evidence of God's faithfulness. "It's real," he breathed, more to himself than to me. "It is," I said. He closed the book gently and handed it back. "Thank you." He paused. "Do you think that love extends to me? Even after what I did?" It was the question haunting him. I knew because it haunted me too. Could this everlasting love cover a destroyer of vows? "I don't know," I said, being painfully honest. "But it found me when I was trying to burn it all down, so I have to believe it's bigger than we can imagine." That moment became a turning point. It was as if seeing the physical proof of the miracle gave Brian a permission he hadn't allowed himself, to hope for his own redemption. He became less burdened, more present. He started leading our evening prayers again, his voice hesitant at first, then growing stronger. He prayed for my dad, for my work, for my heart. He never prayed for us to go back to how we were. He prayed for wisdom for the road ahead, and I began to notice something else. The love I was starting to feel for him wasn't the dizzy, romantic love of our early years. It was something quieter. It was the love of choosing to believe he could change, the love of seeing him struggle to be better and respecting the struggle. It was the love of a teammate in a hard game. I didn't know if it was enough for a lifetime marriage, but it was real, and it was growing in the soil of our shared pain and our shared miracle. Then, in June, the crisis came from a different direction. I was finally back at work, part-time. One afternoon, my boss, a no-nonsense woman named Diane, called me into her office. "Martha, The Johnson account you've been handling, the rebrand for their nonprofit, their director just called. They're going in a different creative direction. They're pulling the project. My stomach dropped. The Johnson account was my main project, my return to work anchor. Did they say why? Diane gave me a sympathetic but professional look. They mentioned some inconsistencies in the initial concepts, but between us, I heard through the grapevine they got wind of some personal turmoil in your life and got cold feet. They want a stable team. The world tilted. My private pain, my marriage crisis, had leaked out and was now costing me my career. The injustice of it burned. I'd done good work. My personal life had nothing to do with my ability to design a logo. I drove home in a blind fury. This was the consequence Brian's actions were still reaping, consequences I was now paying in a realm that was supposed to be just mine. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my careful brickwork of forgiveness felt like it was crumbling. I stormed into the house. Brian was in the kitchen making spaghetti. He took one look at my face and set down the wooden spoon. What happened? I lost the Johnson account, I spat, tears of rage springing to my eyes. Because our personal turmoil made them question my stability. Your secret is now costing me my job. He flinched as if I'd struck him. All the color drained from his face. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't say it wasn't fair. He just absorbed the blow. I am so sorry, Martha, he said, his voice hollow. That is my fault. Entirely. His immediate, total acceptance of blame disarmed me slightly, but the anger still churned. What are we doing, Brian? I cried, the frustration of months pouring out. We're building this careful thing, but the world is still punishing us for what happened. When does it end? He was silent for a long minute. Then he did something unexpected. He walked to the junk drawer, pulled out a pad of paper and a pen, and came back to the table. Sit down, please, he said, his voice calm but strained. Warily, I sat. He sat across from me. I am going to list every consequence of my sin that I can see, he said, his pen poised. The ones you've borne and the ones I've borne. And then I am going to spend the rest of my life, however you want me in it, trying to make restitution for what I can. He looked at me, his gaze steady. This one, the Johnson account. I can't get it back, but I can cover the financial loss. My summer school salary next month will go directly into your savings account. It won't fix it, but it's a start. He began to write. 1. Loss of trust. 2. Marital security destroyed. 3. Public shame for Martha. 4. Damage to Martha's professional reputation. Johnson account. 5. Loss of my own self-respect. The list went on, each item a stone in the foundation of our new life. I watched him, my anger cooling into a profound, aching sadness. This was the cost. This was the unforgiving math of sin. And he was finally, fully facing it, not hiding behind tears or grand gestures, but with a pen and paper and a promise to pay a debt he could never fully repay. When he finished, he slid the paper across to me. It was a long list. This is my responsibility, he said. I own this. You carrying any of it is my greatest shame. My job is to lift it from you, however I can, for as long as it takes. I looked at the list, then at his exhausted, earnest face. The cliffhanger wasn't about the lost account anymore. It was about the list in my hands. It was a map of our devastation. And as I sat there, the journal's promise of everlasting love echoing in my mind, I faced the terrifying practical question. Could a love that lasts forever actually be built from something as heartbreakingly mundane as a list of wrongs, and the long, slow, imperfect work of making them right? The list lived on our refrigerator for a week, held by a magnet from the aquarium we'd visited on our honeymoon. It was a brutal, daily reminder. Brian didn't mention it again, but I saw him look at it every morning when he poured his orange juice. His summer school assignment came through, teaching remedial English to 20 high schoolers who didn't want to be there. The first check, made out to him, was immediately endorsed over to me. I deposited it into my savings account. The transaction feeling cold and clinical. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. He was right. It didn't fix the professional slight, but it acknowledged the wound. The act, however, created a new tension. It felt transactional. Were we reducing our marriage, our miracle, to a balance sheet of sins and payments? The fear I'd felt in the motel room, that we might build something sturdy but loveless, crept back in with a vengeance. We were being so good, so painfully responsible. Where was the joy? Where was the redemption the gospel promised? It all felt like hard labor. I brought this up in counseling. Our therapist, a wise woman named Gail with kind eyes, listened. "You're in the trench work," she said. "This is where love becomes a verb. The feeling may follow, or it may transform into something else entirely. But you can't skip to the end. You have to walk through the middle, even when it feels mercenary." She looked at us both. The list isn't a life sentence, it's an acknowledgement. When you stop needing it to define your interactions, you'll know you're healing. One evening, in late July, I came home to find Brian in the backyard, not staring at the fire pit, but at a small, potted hydrangea bush on the patio table. It was the same shade of blue as my mother's favorite ones. "What's this?" I asked. "I was at the nursery getting soil for my classroom project," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I saw it. It made me think of your mom, and of you." He didn't say it was an apology or an item on the list, it was just a hydrangea. "I thought maybe we could plant it together, something new for the yard." It was such a simple, hopeful gesture. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture trying to recapture the past. It was an offer to build a future, one shrub at a time. "Okay," I said, "let's plant it." We worked side by side in the golden evening light, digging a hole near the fence where it would get morning sun. Our hands brushed in the dirt. We argued lightly about the depth of the hole. We watered it in together. It was normal. It was mundane. And in its simplicity, it was the most intimate thing we'd done in a year. That night, I took the list off the refrigerator. I didn't throw it away. I placed it between the pages of my prayer journal, like a receipt from a costly trip. I didn't need to see it every day anymore. A few days later, Chloe from church called. "I'm having a few people over for a barbecue on Saturday. No big deal, just hot dogs and potato salad. Will you and Brian come?" Her voice was gentle, insistent. "No church talk, just friends." We went. It was a mix of people from church and a few of Chloe's neighbors. There was no pressure. We ate off paper plates. Brian got into a long conversation with Chloe's husband about baseball. I helped make s'mores for the kids at the fire pit. For a few hours, we weren't the couple in crisis. We were just a couple. The label was lifting. On the drive home, Brian reached over and took my hand. It wasn't a dramatic move. He just placed his hand, palm up, on the console between us. I looked at it. The hand that had held mine at our wedding, the hand that had typed text to another woman. After a moment, I placed my hand in his. We drove the rest of the way home like that in a silence that was finally peaceful. The answer came quietly, as redemption always had in this story. It was a Tuesday morning, the day before our one-year crisis anniversary, the day Brian had first confessed. I was sitting on the backyard bench with my journal and a cup of tea, watching the hydrangea bush. It was thriving, new leaves unfurled in the summer sun. I wasn't thinking about Brian or Ashley or my mom. I was just watching a bee hover near the blossoms. And in that moment of perfect, ordinary stillness, I knew. I knew I would stay. Not because a miraculous journal told me to. Not because the church expected it. Not because I was afraid to be alone. I would stay because the man Brian was becoming, the one who made lists and planted hydrangeas and taught summer school to pay a debt, was a man I could respect. The love I felt for him now was not the dizzy first love. It was deeper. It was a love that had seen the absolute worst and was choosing, day by day, to believe in a better anyway. It was a love woven with threads of forgiveness and grief and hope, stronger than any single emotion could ever be. It was the everlasting kind, not a feeling that lasted forever, but a choice that could. That evening, I told him. We were doing the dishes, him washing, me drying. The window was open, letting in the chirp of crickets. "Brian," I said, a clean plate in my hand. "I'm not going anywhere." He stopped, his hands submerged in the soapy water. He didn't turn around, his shoulders tensed, then slowly relaxed. He took a deep, shuddering breath. When he finally turned, his face was wet, but he was smiling, a real whole smile I hadn't seen in years. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." We finished the dishes. We watched a movie. We went to bed in the same room, the guest room now just an office again. We held each other, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a truce. It felt like a homecoming to a new country. I didn't burn my prayer journal again. I kept writing in it. The entries changed. They became less about my struggles and more about our small, shared life. Brian made pancakes shaped like states. We painted the guest room. We prayed for Chloe's pregnancy. The journal was whole, but so was I. Not the same as before. Whole like a bone that breaks and heals stronger at the fracture. whole like a marriage that dies and is resurrected into something different, something real. One Sunday, months later, Pastor Mark preached on the prophet Joel. He read a verse that made my breath catch. I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten. Joel 2:25. He talked about how God doesn't just forgive our past. He can redeem the time we thought was lost to pain and failure. I looked at Brian beside me. He was listening intently, his hand finding mine. We had lost a year to the locusts of grief and betrayal. But as I sat there, holding the hand of the man I had chosen anew, feeling the solid, familiar weight of my restored journal in my bag, I understood. The miracle wasn't just the pages made whole again in a night. The miracle was the two of us, made whole again over time. The love was everlasting, and it was just beginning.